October 24, 1944, found Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane standing in the conning tower of USS Tang, his eyes scanning the dark waters of the Formosa Strait with the intensity of a predator who had perfected his craft. The submarine cut through the Pacific like a steel phantom, and O'Kane, already a legend among submariners, was about to embark on what would become the most tragic patrol in American naval history. The Tang was no ordinary vessel. Launched in August 1943 at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California, she represented the apex of American submarine technology. A Balao-class boat stretching 311 feet in length, armed with 10 torpedo tubes and crewed by 87 of the Navy's finest. But it was her commander who made her extraordinary. Richard O'Kane had served as executive officer under the legendary Dudley "Mush" Morton aboard USS Wahoo, learning the aggressive tactics that would define his own command style. When he took command of Tang in October 1943, he brought with him a philosophy that would terrify the Japanese merchant marine: attack relentlessly, press close, and never waste a torpedo. According to naval historian Clay Blair's seminal work, Silent Victory: The U.S. Submarine War Against Japan, O'Kane possessed an almost supernatural ability to position his submarine for perfect shots, often attacking from distances that other commanders considered suicidal. His first patrol as Tang's commander had been a harbinger of things to come. 5 enemy ships sent to the bottom. The second patrol yielded 2 more. The third patrol was spectacular. 10 ships destroyed, making it one of the most successful single patrols of the entire war. By the time Tang departed Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944 for her 5th and final patrol, she had already established herself as one of the most lethal submarines in the Pacific Fleet. Her crew moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had danced with death so many times they no longer feared it. They trusted O'Kane completely, even when his tactics seemed to defy every principle of cautious submarine warfare. He would take Tang into harbors where other commanders feared to venture, slipping past patrol boats and minefields to strike at anchored vessels. He would surface in the middle of convoys to finish off crippled ships with his deck gun. He was audacious, brilliant, and seemingly invincible. The mission orders for Patrol 5 were straightforward: proceed to the waters around Formosa, modern-day Taiwan, and interdict Japanese shipping between the home islands and their southern empire. By October 1944, Japan's situation had become desperate. The American advance across the Pacific had severed supply lines, and merchant ships were the lifeline keeping the war machine functioning. Every freighter, every tanker, every transport that reached port meant more fuel for aircraft, more ammunition for soldiers, more rice for a starving population. O'Kane understood this arithmetic of destruction. His job was to cut that lifeline, one torpedo at a time. As Tang patrolled the Formosa Strait that October evening, her previous successes had already made her crew confident, perhaps even cocky. They had no way of knowing that within hours, their submarine would add 5 more victims to her tally, and then become a victim herself in the most ironic twist of fate imaginable. The Tang's 5th patrol began with the methodical precision that had become O'Kane's trademark. After departing Pearl Harbor on September 24th, the submarine made its way westward through waters that had witnessed 3 years of brutal submarine warfare. The Pacific had become a graveyard for both Japanese merchant ships and American submarines. By October 1944, the United States had lost 52 submarines to enemy action, taking more than 3,500 men to their deaths in the crushing depths. O'Kane drove his crew hard, conducting endless drills as Tang crossed the vast ocean. Torpedo loading exercises, crash dive procedures, approach simulations. Every evolution was practiced until it became muscle memory. The commander knew that in combat, there would be no time for hesitation. His executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Frank Springer, oversaw these preparations with the same intensity. Below decks, the torpedo crews worked in the cramped spaces around their deadly charges, handling the 20-foot-long Mark 18 electric torpedoes that had become Tang's primary weapon. The Mark 18 was a fascinating piece of technology, copied from captured German designs. Unlike the older Mark 14 steam torpedoes that left telltale wakes across the water, the Mark 18 ran on electric batteries, producing no wake, and making it nearly impossible for targets to detect the incoming weapon. However, these torpedoes had their own quirks and problems. They were slower than steam torpedoes, more sensitive to depth control issues, and occasionally suffered from circular runs, a malfunction where the torpedo would curve back toward the submarine that fired it. Despite these known issues, O'Kane preferred them for night surface attacks where stealth was paramount. By early October, Tang had reached her patrol area. The waters around Formosa teemed with Japanese shipping, vessels desperately trying to move supplies between the home islands and the embattled territories to the south. On October 10, 1944, Tang drew first blood. A Japanese freighter appeared on the horizon, zigzagging in a futile attempt at evasive action. O'Kane maneuvered Tang into position, calculated the firing solution with the precision of a mathematician, and sent a torpedo streaking toward the target. The explosion sent a column of water and debris skyward as the freighter began its death plunge. The next 2 weeks became a masterclass in submarine warfare. O'Kane hunted with patient aggression, tracking convoys, analyzing their patterns, and striking when conditions were optimal. On October 11th, another freighter went down. On October 23rd, Tang encountered a convoy of 3 ships and systematically destroyed 2 of them in a textbook attack. The submarine's torpedo room crews worked frantically to reload the tubes after each attack, knowing that their commander's aggressive tactics meant they would need every weapon aboard. Throughout these attacks, O'Kane displayed the tactical genius that had made him famous. He would study his targets for hours, noting their speed, course changes, and escort patterns. He understood that merchant ship captains followed predictable habits. They would zig and zag at regular intervals, change course at specific times, and react to threats in expected ways. By anticipating these patterns, O'Kane could position Tang exactly where she needed to be, minimizing the time targets had to react and maximizing the probability of hits. The crew's confidence soared with each success. In the cramped confines of the submarine, men celebrated their victories with whatever luxuries were available: extra coffee rations, a slightly better meal from the galley, the satisfaction of marking another kill on Tang's battle flag. They had developed an almost supernatural faith in their commander's abilities. If O'Kane said they could penetrate a harbor defended by patrol boats and shore batteries, they believed him. If he decided to surface in the middle of a convoy to finish off cripples with the deck gun, they trusted his judgment completely. October 24, 1944 dawned with deceptive calm over the Formosa Strait, but by evening the waters would run red with the destruction Tang was about to unleash. Commander O'Kane had spotted something extraordinary through his periscope just after sunset: a heavily laden convoy of Japanese ships, moving north along the coast in a desperate attempt to reach the relative safety of home waters. The convoy consisted of transport ships, tankers, and cargo vessels, all packed with the resources Japan desperately needed. Intelligence reports had indicated increased shipping activity in the area, and O'Kane had positioned Tang perfectly to intercept. As darkness fell, he made the decision to conduct a night surface attack, the tactic he had perfected over 4 previous patrols. On the surface, Tang could use her diesel engines for higher speed, allowing O'Kane to maneuver around the convoy and attack from multiple angles, creating the impression of several submarines rather than just one. The attack began at approximately 8 o'clock in the evening. O'Kane identified the largest transport in the convoy, a vessel of approximately 10,000 tons, and ordered the firing of 2 torpedoes. The crew counted the seconds: 30, 40, 50, and then the night erupted with the sound of explosions. The transport shuddered as both torpedoes struck home, massive detonations that sent flames shooting into the sky. Before the escorts could react, O'Kane had swung Tang around and was lining up another shot. The second victim was a tanker, her holds filled with precious fuel oil destined for Japanese airfields. A single torpedo amidships was enough. The explosion ignited the tanker's cargo, creating an inferno that lit up the night sky for miles. Sailors aboard the other ships watched in horror as their companion vessel transformed into a floating bonfire, men jumping into the sea to escape the flames. The escorts began firing wildly, their searchlights sweeping the dark waters, but Tang had already moved to a new position. What followed was a display of submarine warfare at its most devastating. O'Kane worked his way through the convoy like a surgeon with a scalpel, each attack precisely calculated, each torpedo carefully aimed. A third ship went down, then a fourth. The Japanese escorts were in chaos, unable to coordinate their defenses, unable to even locate their attacker. Tang would attack from one angle, then race around to strike from another direction, always staying ahead of the escorts, always maintaining the initiative. By 10 o'clock that evening, Tang had expended most of her torpedoes. The convoy was in complete disarray, ships burning, men in the water, escorts firing at shadows. O'Kane withdrew briefly to assess the situation and plan his next moves. In the conning tower, the crew was exhausted but exhilarated. They had just witnessed one of the most successful single attacks of the entire submarine campaign. 5 ships destroyed in a single evening. It was the kind of success that would earn commendations and headlines back home. But Tang still had 2 torpedoes remaining, one in the forward torpedo room and one in the stern. O'Kane was not a man to leave the job half-finished. As midnight approached, he spotted one more target, a crippled transport that had separated from the convoy, limping along at reduced speed. The ship had probably been damaged in one of the earlier attacks and was now trying to reach the safety of the coast. O'Kane decided to finish what he had started. This decision, to pursue one last target instead of clearing the area after such a successful attack, would prove to be the most fateful of his career. The minutes after midnight on October 25, 1944 found USS Tang stalking her final victim through waters still churning with debris from the earlier carnage. Commander O'Kane studied the crippled transport through his binoculars, calculating angles and distances with the practiced ease of a man who had made hundreds of such computations. The target was moving slowly, perhaps 7 knots, listing slightly to port, clearly damaged but still afloat. It would be an easy kill. In the conning tower, the atmosphere was tense despite the evening's earlier successes. Lieutenant Commander Springer stood beside O'Kane, while the helmsmen maintained their approach course. Below in the forward torpedo room, the crew prepared the last bow torpedo for firing. The weapon they loaded into the tube was a Mark 18 electric torpedo, the same type that had performed flawlessly during the earlier attacks. The torpedo crew checked the settings carefully: depth, speed, gyro angle, each parameter verified and double-checked according to standard procedure. The Tang's approach was textbook perfect. O'Kane brought the submarine to within less than 1,000 yards of the target, far closer than most submarine commanders would dare, but exactly the range where O'Kane felt most confident. At close range, there was less time for things to go wrong, less distance for the torpedo to deviate from its course, and less chance the target could take evasive action. It was aggressive, it was dangerous, and it had worked perfectly 23 times before on this patrol alone. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, O'Kane gave the order to fire. The submarine shuddered slightly as compressed air ejected the torpedo from tube number 1. In the torpedo room, men felt the familiar sensation of the boat becoming lighter as the 2,100-pound weapon departed. On the surface, there was barely a splash as the torpedo entered the water and its electric motor engaged. The weapon began its run, propellers spinning silently, guidance system locked on the target bearing. Then something went horribly wrong. Instead of tracking straight toward the target, the torpedo's path began to curve. In the conning tower, O'Kane and his officers watched with growing horror as their weapon deviated from its intended course. Theories about what caused this malfunction have been debated by naval historians for decades. The most likely explanation involves a failure in the torpedo's depth control mechanism. If the weapon ran too shallow, it could broach the surface, and when it re-entered the water, the impact could damage the gyroscope that controlled its direction. Another possibility is that a defect in the gyroscope itself caused the torpedo to enter what submariners dreaded most, a circular run. Whatever the cause, the result was immediately apparent and utterly catastrophic. The torpedo completed its curve and was now heading back directly toward USS Tang. O'Kane's reaction was instantaneous. He ordered flank speed and full right rudder, attempting to turn the submarine away from the approaching weapon. The diesel engines roared to full power, and Tang began to swing to starboard, her bow cutting through the water as the helmsman spun the wheel. But it was too late. 20 seconds after firing, perhaps 25, Accounts vary slightly. The torpedo struck USS Tang on the stern. The explosion was devastating, far more destructive than anything the submarine had endured in 5 combat patrols. The detonation occurred near the aft torpedo room, and the blast tore through bulkheads, ruptured fuel tanks, and destroyed the electrical systems. Men in the after section of the boat died instantly, crushed by the explosion or drowned as seawater flooded in through the massive hole in the hull. The submarine's stern began to sink immediately. On the bridge, O'Kane and the other men topside were thrown to the deck by the force of the explosion. Below, in the forward sections, men struggled to maintain their footing as the boat took on a steep angle. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power failed. Throughout the submarine, trained crews began executing their emergency procedures, but they all knew what the impossible angle of the deck meant. Tang was going down, and she was going down fast. The chaos aboard USS Tang in those first terrible seconds after the torpedo strike defied description. The explosion had gutted the submarine's stern section, killing everyone in the aft torpedo room instantly, and flooding the after-engine room so rapidly that men there had no chance of escape. The force of the blast propelled Tang's bow upward at a severe angle as her stern sank, creating a nightmarish environment where men struggled to climb what had been level decks moments before. Commander O'Kane, still on the bridge with 8 other men, immediately grasped their situation. The submarine was mortally wounded and sinking fast. He ordered everyone topside to abandon ship, a command that came too late for most of the crew trapped below. The 9 men on the bridge began throwing themselves into the dark water, knowing that when Tang's bow finally went under, the suction could drag them down with her. O'Kane was the last to leave the bridge, maintaining his position as captain even as his command slid beneath the waves. Below decks, the forward sections of the submarine remained intact but rapidly became death traps. In the forward torpedo room, control room, and forward engine room, approximately 30 men realized they could not reach the hatches before Tang sank. These men, torpedo men, electricians, engine men, and officers, faced a horrific choice: attempt to escape through the rapidly flooding compartments and likely drown in the attempt, or seal themselves in and hope for rescue that might never come. Lieutenant Lawrence Savadkin, the torpedo officer, took charge in the forward sections. Working in near darkness with only emergency lights, he organized the survivors and began implementing escape procedures. The submarine was designed with escape trunks, vertical shafts that could be flooded to allow men to swim to the surface. But using them at night, in enemy waters, while the submarine was settling at an angle, presented enormous challenges. The men knew the Japanese escorts were still nearby, knew that swimmers on the surface would be vulnerable, but remaining aboard a sinking submarine offered no hope at all. The Tang's bow struck the bottom at 180 feet, not an impossible depth but deep enough to make escape extremely difficult. The submarine settled with a slight list, her forward section still holding air, her after sections completely flooded and open to the sea. In the dark, crowded compartments, men could hear the groaning of stressed metal, the hiss of air escaping, and the terrible silence where their shipmates had been moments before. They began to organize themselves for escape attempts, knowing that every minute brought them closer to death from carbon dioxide poisoning as they breathed the limited air supply. On the surface, O'Kane and the 8 other men from the bridge found themselves in water still churning with debris from the convoy attacks hours earlier. They were approximately 300 yards from where Tang had disappeared, close enough to have been endangered by the suction but fortunate enough to have cleared the immediate danger zone. The sea was covered with oil from the sunken ships, and the men struggled to stay afloat and stay together in the darkness. Then their situation deteriorated further. A Japanese escort vessel, one of the ships that had been protecting the convoy, spotted the swimmers in the water. The destroyer began moving toward them, her searchlights sweeping the surface. The Americans had no way to know whether the Japanese intended rescue or execution. Both were common enough in the brutal Pacific War. As the escort approached, O'Kane and his men could only tread water and wait to learn their fate. The Japanese sailors aboard the escort were professionals who had witnessed enough death that night to last a lifetime. When their searchlights illuminated the American submariners, they made the decision to rescue rather than kill. Lines were thrown over the side, and the 9 Americans were hauled aboard, exhausted, covered in oil, and suffering from various injuries. They were immediately placed under guard, enemy combatants who had just destroyed 5 ships and killed hundreds of Japanese sailors. 180 feet beneath the surface, in the forward compartments of USS Tang, 30 men faced the most terrifying ordeal any submariner could imagine. Lieutenant Savadkin moved through the darkened control room, taking stock of survivors and evaluating their options. The air was already becoming thick and difficult to breathe. With 30 men consuming oxygen in sealed compartments, they had perhaps 12 hours before carbon dioxide poisoning made coherent thought impossible, perhaps 20 hours before they lost consciousness entirely. The submarine's escape procedure had been drilled countless times, but always in training scenarios where instructors monitored every step and safety measures were in place. Now, in the dark, in enemy waters, with the boat at an impossible angle and Japanese escorts prowling overhead, the theoretical training would face its ultimate test. The men divided themselves into groups, with the most experienced swimmers and those in the best physical condition preparing to go first. They would use the Momsen lung, a primitive breathing device consisting of a rubber bag worn around the neck that recycled exhaled air and provided oxygen during ascent. The escape procedure required flooding the escape trunk, a process that was dangerous under the best circumstances. The trunk was a vertical cylinder, perhaps 4 feet in diameter and 8 feet tall, with a lower hatch opening into the submarine and an upper hatch opening to the sea. Men would climb into the trunk, seal the lower hatch, flood the chamber until pressure equalized with the sea outside, then open the upper hatch and swim to the surface. In theory, 4 men could use the trunk simultaneously. In practice, with the submarine at an angle in darkness with men exhausted and frightened, the procedure would be far more difficult. The first group of 4 men entered the escape trunk around 4 o'clock in the morning on October 25th. They sealed the lower hatch, began flooding the chamber, and waited as water rose around them. The pressure increased dramatically, pushing against their eardrums, compressing their lungs, creating a sensation of being crushed. When pressure equalized and they opened the upper hatch, the rush of air escaping created turbulence that threatened to tear the Momsen lungs from their mouths. One by one, they kicked off toward the surface, ascending through 180 feet of dark water, fighting to exhale continuously to prevent their lungs from rupturing as pressure decreased. Only 1 man from that first group reached the surface alive. The others, whether from equipment failure, panic, or simply the impossible conditions, drowned during the ascent or were swept away by currents before they could be spotted. The survivor, torpedoman second class Floyd Caverly, broke the surface as dawn was breaking, gulping air and searching frantically for his shipmates. He never saw them again. Within minutes, a Japanese escort spotted him and hauled him aboard, the 10th Tang survivor to be captured. Back in the submarine, the men waiting their turn heard the escape trunk cycle again and again. Each time, 4 men would enter, flood the chamber, and attempt the ascent. Each time, most failed to reach the surface alive. The mathematics of survival were brutal. Of 30 men attempting escape, only 13 would make it to the surface, and only 8 of those would survive long enough to be rescued by the Japanese. The reasons for failure were numerous: defective Momsen lungs, nitrogen narcosis at depth, panic attacks during ascent, water currents separating men from the group, or simply the overwhelming physical demands of swimming nearly 200 feet while holding your breath and managing buoyancy. Those who did reach the surface faced additional dangers. The Japanese escorts were systematic in their search, picking up survivors, but also dropping depth charges to ensure no more submarines were lurking nearby. The concussions from these explosions killed at least 1 Tang crewman who had successfully escaped the submarine, his internal organs ruptured by the pressure wave. Others simply disappeared, swept away by currents or succumbing to hypothermia in the pre-dawn darkness. By 9 o'clock on the morning of October 25th, the escape attempts were over. 8 men had reached the surface alive and been rescued. 22 others remained in Tang, either dead from the initial explosion, drowned in flooded compartments, or killed during failed escape attempts. The submarine that had terrorized Japanese shipping for 5 patrols, that had sunk 33 enemy vessels and damaged others, now rested on the bottom of the Formosa Strait, a steel tomb for 3/4 of her crew. The Japanese destroyer that plucked Commander Richard O'Kane and his surviving crewmen from the water showed no mercy in the days that followed their rescue. The 9 men from Tang's bridge and the 8 who escaped from the sunken submarine were brought together aboard the escort vessel, bruised, exhausted, and facing an uncertain fate. Japanese naval doctrine regarding captured submariners was inconsistent at best. Some were treated as prisoners of war according to international conventions, while others simply disappeared, executed for the crime of sinking merchant vessels that kept Japan's war machine functioning. The initial interrogations began immediately. Japanese naval intelligence officers understood they had captured something extraordinary, the commander and crew of one of America's most successful submarines. O'Kane, despite his exhausted state, refused to provide anything beyond his name, rank, and service number, the minimum required by the Geneva Conventions. His defiance earned him beatings, but the Japanese officers recognized they had a prize captive and eventually opted for psychological pressure over physical torture. The 17 survivors were transferred to a larger vessel and then to Formosa itself, where more systematic interrogations took place. Japanese intelligence wanted to know everything: Tang's capabilities, American submarine tactics, the locations of other boats, planned operations, code systems, and recognition signals. The interrogators were professionals who understood that prolonged isolation, deprivation of sleep, and psychological manipulation could break men where physical torture might only strengthen their resolve. According to post-war accounts compiled by the Naval Historical Center, the Japanese interrogators were particularly interested in the Mark 18 torpedo. They had recovered what remained of the weapon that destroyed Tang, and the circular run phenomenon fascinated them. They wanted to know if this was a known defect, if other American submarines had experienced similar problems, and whether the Americans had developed countermeasures. O'Kane's responses were carefully non-committal, providing information that the Japanese could easily verify while revealing nothing that might endanger other submarines or their crews. The survivors were eventually transported to Japan proper, traveling in the holds of merchant ships, the very type of vessel they had been hunting for 5 patrols. The irony was not lost on them. They were held in a succession of prison camps, enduring the brutal conditions that characterized Japanese POW facilities: inadequate food, minimal medical care, forced labor, and frequent beatings. The Tang survivors were separated and kept in different camps, a standard practice designed to prevent prisoners from supporting each other and to maximize opportunities for extracting intelligence. Throughout their captivity, which would last nearly 10 months, the Tang survivors maintained military discipline as much as possible. They memorized details of other prisoners they encountered, camp locations, guard routines, and potential escape routes. They knew that even as prisoners they remained naval officers and enlisted men with duties to perform. More practically, they understood that maintaining military structure and discipline gave them purpose and helped combat the psychological effects of captivity. The winter of 1944 into 45 was particularly harsh. Food rations decreased as Japan's own supply situation deteriorated under the American submarine blockade, a blockade that Tang had helped establish. The prisoners suffered from malnutrition, diseases like dysentery and beriberi, and the casual brutality of guards who increasingly viewed them with hatred as Japan's military situation worsened. Several Tang crewmen came close to death from illness or abuse, surviving only through the support of fellow prisoners and sheer determination to live long enough to see Japan defeated. O'Kane himself was held in Ofuna, a secret interrogation camp near Yokohama where high-value prisoners were taken. The facility was not registered with the International Red Cross, allowing the Japanese to claim ignorance of the prisoners' whereabouts and to subject them to treatment that might otherwise have drawn international condemnation. O'Kane endured months of questioning, always walking the fine line between cooperation that might ease his conditions and revelation that might harm the war effort. By August 1945, the 17 Tang survivors scattered across various Japanese prison camps understood that something fundamental had changed in the war. The air raids had intensified dramatically, with American B-29 bombers appearing over Japanese cities almost daily. The guards became more nervous, more brutal, and more unpredictable. Rumors circulated among prisoners about massive new weapons, about Soviet entry into the war, about Japan preparing for a final defense of the home islands that would kill millions. Then, on August 15th, the war ended with shocking suddenness. Emperor Hirohito's radio broadcast announcing Japan's surrender left the prison guards confused and prisoners cautiously optimistic. For the Tang survivors, the moment brought overwhelming relief mixed with profound grief. They had survived one of the war's most traumatic experiences and months of brutal captivity, but the price had been enormous. Of Tang's 87-man crew, only 9 remained alive, a survival rate of approximately 10%. The liberation process was chaotic. American forces prioritized reaching prisoner camps quickly, knowing that some guards might execute prisoners rather than allow them to be freed. The Tang survivors were eventually consolidated at a collection point near Yokohama, where they received medical treatment, proper food, and, for the first time in months, contact with other American servicemen. The joy of liberation was tempered by the physical toll of captivity. All 17 men had lost dramatic amounts of weight, suffered from various diseases, and bore psychological scars that would take years to process. Commander O'Kane's first priority upon liberation was ensuring his men received proper care. Only then did he begin the painful task of documenting what had happened to Tang. Navy intelligence officers interviewed him extensively, recording every detail of the submarine's final patrol: the torpedo malfunction, the sinking, and the escape attempts. These debriefings served multiple purposes. They helped the Navy understand what had happened. They provided information that might prevent similar tragedies, and they established the official record that would justify award recommendations. The Navy conducted a formal investigation into Tang's loss. Investigators examined recovered Japanese records, interviewed survivors, and analyzed the Mark 18 torpedo specifications. They concluded that the most likely cause of the circular run was a depth control malfunction that caused the torpedo to broach, with the subsequent re-entry into water damaging the gyroscope steering mechanism. This finding led to modifications in torpedo testing procedures and changes in combat doctrine. Submarines were instructed to maneuver away from the firing position immediately after launching torpedoes, providing slightly more reaction time if a circular run occurred. In February 1946, Commander Richard O'Kane stood at the White House as President Harry Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. The citation recognized his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity during Tang's 5 war patrols, particularly his aggressive tactics that had destroyed 33 enemy vessels. The ceremony was bittersweet. O'Kane accepted the medal on behalf of his entire crew, the 78 men who had died aboard Tang and the 17 who survived only through extraordinary courage and luck. Other Tang crew members received decorations as well. Lieutenant Lawrence Savadkin earned the Navy Cross for his leadership during the escape attempts. Several enlisted men received Silver Stars and Bronze Stars for their actions both during combat operations and after the sinking. The Navy ensured that families of the men who died received full benefits and recognition of their sacrifice. Tang herself was awarded 2 Presidential Unit citations, recognition that extended to every man who had served aboard her. The investigation's findings about the Mark 18 torpedo proved controversial. Some officers argued that the torpedo's defects were known and that continuing to use them represented negligence. Others pointed out that no weapon system is perfect and that the Mark 18's stealth advantages outweighed its occasional malfunctions. The debate continued for years in naval journals and official reports, part of the larger conversation about how the Navy had managed the torpedo crisis that had plagued submarine operations throughout the war's first 2 years. The story of USS Tang resonated through the submarine community long after the war ended. Her combination of spectacular success and tragic loss made her a case study in naval academies, submarine schools, and warfare analysis courses. The lessons drawn from Tang's 5 patrols shaped submarine doctrine for generations, influencing everything from attack procedures to weapon reliability standards to escape system design. The most obvious lesson concerned torpedo reliability. The Mark 18 torpedo, despite its stealth advantages, had demonstrated a fatal flaw. The Navy's response included extensive modifications to depth control mechanisms, improved gyroscope designs, and more rigorous testing protocols. Subsequent torpedo generations incorporated multiple redundant safety systems designed to prevent circular runs. Submarine commanders received updated guidance on evasive maneuvers after firing, and new doctrine required immediate departure from the firing position regardless of target status. But Tang's legacy extended far beyond torpedo technology. O'Kane's aggressive tactics, pressing close to targets, conducting night surface attacks, penetrating defended anchorages, had proven devastatingly effective. During 5 patrols, Tang had destroyed 33 confirmed Japanese ships totaling over 100,000 tons, making her one of the war's most successful submarines by any metric. This success validated aggressive submarine warfare and influenced post-war doctrine that emphasized offensive operations over cautious patrols. The submarine escape story provided equally important lessons. Of the 30 men who attempted to escape from Tang's flooded compartments, only 8 survived to be rescued. This 27% success rate was actually higher than previous escape attempts from similar depths, suggesting that the training and equipment were adequate, but that escape from a sunk submarine remained extraordinarily dangerous. The Navy responded by improving escape training, developing better breathing devices, and eventually creating submarine rescue vehicles that could reach sunken boats and extract survivors without requiring them to swim to the surface. The Tang disaster also influenced submarine design philosophy. Naval architects recognized that compartmentalization, the practice of dividing submarines into separate watertight sections, had saved the lives of the men in Tang's forward compartments. Future submarine designs emphasized even greater compartmentalization, stronger bulkheads, and improved damage control systems. The goal was ensuring that a single torpedo hit, even a catastrophic one, would not doom the entire crew. Psychologically, Tang's story became part of submarine culture, a reminder of both the service's effectiveness and its dangers. Submariners knew that their vessels were extraordinarily lethal weapons that could sink enemy ships far larger than themselves. But they also understood that submarines were fragile craft operating in an unforgiving environment, where mistakes or equipment failures could be instantly fatal. This understanding shaped submarine service culture, emphasizing technical excellence, strict adherence to procedures, and the understanding that every man's life depended on his shipmate's competence. The 17 Tang survivors returned to civilian life carrying psychological burdens that the 1940s military was ill-equipped to address. Post-traumatic stress disorder had not yet been recognized as a clinical condition, and returning veterans were expected to simply readjust to peacetime existence. Many Tang survivors struggled with survivor's guilt, haunted by memories of shipmates who had died in the explosion or drowned during escape attempts. Some found purpose in sharing their experiences, speaking at submarine schools and naval gatherings. Others preferred silence, building new lives while carrying their experiences privately. Commander O'Kane remained in the Navy after the war, eventually retiring as a rear admiral. He wrote a memoir titled Clear the Bridge, published in 1977, providing his personal account of Tang's patrols and final moments. The book became required reading in submarine warfare courses, valued for its tactical insights and honest assessment of both successes and failures. O'Kane's post-war writings emphasized the human cost of submarine warfare, noting that American submarines lost 52 boats and approximately 3,600 men during the war, the highest casualty rate of any American military service. The decades following World War II saw USS Tang's story evolve from recent memory into historical legend. The submarine that had achieved such spectacular success before being destroyed by her own torpedo became a symbol of both American submarine effectiveness and the war's tragic ironies. Historians, veterans, and the general public found in Tang's story elements that resonated across generations: courage, sacrifice, technological triumph and failure, and the unpredictable nature of combat. In 1972, the Navy commissioned a new USS Tang, a nuclear attack submarine designated SS-674. The choice of name honored the original Tang's legacy, while ensuring that her story would continue to inspire future generations of submariners. The new Tang served with distinction until her decommissioning in 1990, carrying forward the aggressive spirit that had characterized her predecessor. Throughout her service, the submarine's crew maintained connections with survivors of the original Tang, recognizing that they sailed under a name purchased with extraordinary sacrifice. Museums and memorial sites incorporated Tang's story into their World War II submarine exhibits. The USS Bowfin Submarine Museum in Pearl Harbor features extensive displays about Tang, including artifacts recovered from survivors and detailed reconstructions of her final patrol. These exhibits serve educational purposes, helping visitors understand both submarine warfare's technical aspects and its human dimensions. The emphasis is always on the crew: the 87 men who sailed aboard Tang, the 78 who died either in the sinking or during captivity, and the 9 who survived to tell the story. Academic studies of Tang's loss continued as new information emerged. In 1995, researchers gained access to previously classified Japanese records that provided details about Tang's attacks on the Formosa convoy and the subsequent rescue of survivors. These documents confirmed the devastating effectiveness of Tang's assault. 5 ships totaling over 20,000 tons destroyed in a single evening, while also providing Japanese perspectives on the battle. The escorts had been completely overwhelmed by O'Kane's tactics, unable to coordinate an effective defense or even accurately locate their attacker until Tang's own torpedo betrayed her position. Modern torpedo technology analysis shed new light on the circular run phenomenon. Engineers examining the Mark 18 design with 21st century knowledge identified multiple potential failure modes, any of which could have caused the malfunction that destroyed Tang. The most likely scenario involved a combination of factors: the torpedo running shallow due to a depth control failure, broaching the surface, and having its gyroscope damaged when it re-entered the water. The damage would have caused the steering mechanism to lock in a turning position, creating the fatal circle. This analysis vindicated O'Kane and his crew. The malfunction was a known risk of the weapon system, not a result of any error in firing procedures or tactical decisions. The broader historical context of Tang's loss became clearer as scholars examined America's submarine campaign in its entirety. By October 1944, American submarines had effectively severed Japan's maritime supply lines, strangling the island nation's war economy. Tang was one of approximately 200 submarines conducting this campaign, but her 33 confirmed kills placed her among the top performers. Historians calculated that American submarines sank approximately 1,300 Japanese merchant ships and 300 naval vessels during the war, with Tang accounting for roughly 2.5% of merchant vessel losses. This contribution was achieved despite the submarine service comprising less than 2% of Navy personnel, a testament to the effectiveness and danger of submarine warfare. Survivor accounts became increasingly important as the original Tang crew aged. The men who had escaped the sunken submarine or survived captivity found that their experiences carried weight with younger generations interested in World War II history. Veterans like Floyd Caverly and Lawrence Savadkin gave interviews to historians, spoke at naval events, and corresponded with researchers documenting submarine operations. Their testimony provided details absent from official records: the smell of diesel fuel and explosives in Tang's compartments, the sound of the ocean rushing through ruptured hull plates, the terror of swimming toward a surface that seemed impossibly distant, the despair of Japanese prison camps. Commander O'Kane's death in February 1994 at age 83 marked the passing of one of World War II's most celebrated submarine commanders. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery drew former submariners from across the country, men who had never served with O'Kane but who understood that he represented the best of their service. The ceremony included full military honors, with a Navy band playing and an honor guard firing a 21-gun salute. O'Kane was buried with the Medal of Honor he had received nearly 50 years earlier, the award that recognized not just his own courage, but that of every man who had served aboard Tang. The last survivor of USS Tang, Floyd Caverly, passed away in May 2003 at age 84. His death closed a chapter of living history, transforming Tang's story from personal memory into pure historical record. Caverly had spent decades sharing his experiences with students, historians, and fellow veterans, ensuring that the sacrifice of his 78 shipmates would not be forgotten. His obituaries in major newspapers recounted Tang's final patrol, introducing new generations to a story that captured both the triumph and tragedy of submarine warfare. Modern naval historians continue to analyze Tang's final patrol for tactical and technological lessons. The submarine's aggressive approach, conducting multiple attacks on a single convoy, exhausting her torpedo load, and pursuing one final target despite already achieving spectacular success, raises questions about risk management in combat. Some analysts argue that O'Kane should have withdrawn after destroying 5 ships, that pressing the attack with his last torpedo was an unnecessary risk. Others counter that submarine commanders in October 1944 operated under enormous pressure to maximize destruction of Japanese shipping, that O'Kane's decision was consistent with his orders and the Navy's aggressive doctrine, and that the circular run was an unforeseeable equipment malfunction rather than a consequence of tactical excess. The technological debate about the Mark 18 torpedo continues in specialized forums. Modern engineers note that the weapon represented a compromise, trading speed and reliability for the stealth of a wakeless approach. In Tang's case, this compromise proved fatal. But in hundreds of other attacks throughout the war, Mark 18 torpedoes performed exactly as designed, allowing submarines to sink enemy ships without revealing their positions. The question of whether the Navy should have withdrawn the weapon after recognizing its circular run tendency remains contentious, highlighting the eternal military dilemma of balancing effectiveness against reliability. Tang's story has been featured in numerous books, documentaries, and educational programs. Each retelling emphasizes different aspects. Some focus on O'Kane's tactical brilliance, others on the crew's courage, still others on the technological failures that led to tragedy. The History Channel, National Geographic, and various military history programs have produced documentaries about Tang, using interviews with survivors, computer-generated reconstructions, and expert analysis to bring the story to life. These programs reach audiences who might never read naval history books, ensuring that Tang's legacy extends beyond military circles into broader public consciousness. The wreck of USS Tang lies in the Formosa Strait, approximately 180 feet below the surface, exactly where she came to rest on October 25, 1944. The submarine is considered a war grave, protected by international maritime law and respect for the 78 men whose remains are entombed within her hull. No salvage operations have been conducted, and the Navy has stated that Tang should remain undisturbed as a memorial to her crew. The exact coordinates are not publicized, protecting the site from unauthorized divers or treasure hunters who might disturb the wreck. Educational institutions have incorporated Tang's story into their curricula as a case study in leadership, decision-making under pressure, and the human cost of technological warfare. The Naval War College uses Tang's final patrol in its submarine tactics courses, analyzing O'Kane's decisions and asking students to evaluate his choices. Business schools have examined O'Kane's leadership style, noting how he built crew confidence through training and successful operations. Engineering programs use the Mark 18 torpedo failure as an example of the importance of reliability testing and the need for multiple redundant safety systems in critical applications. The Tang's legacy ultimately transcends her individual story. She represents all the submarines and submariners of World War II, the men who took fragile steel tubes beneath hostile waters to attack an enemy vastly superior in surface forces. She embodies the courage required to serve in submarines, where equipment failures or enemy action could trap men underwater with no possibility of rescue. She symbolizes the technological evolution of warfare, where sophisticated weapon systems provided enormous advantages but also created new vulnerabilities. And she reminds us that even in humanity's most destructive conflicts, individual stories of courage, sacrifice, and survival deserve to be remembered and honored. As of 2025, 80 years after Tang's loss, her story continues to resonate. New historical research occasionally surfaces details about her patrols or the experiences of survivors. Veterans' descendants maintain connections with submarine memorial organizations, ensuring their ancestors' service is remembered. The modern submarine service, with its nuclear-powered boats and sophisticated weapon systems, still looks back to World War II submarines like Tang as the foundation of its traditions and tactical doctrine. The aggressive spirit that O'Kane embodied, the willingness to take calculated risks, press close to the enemy, and maximize every advantage, remains central to submarine culture. The final accounting of USS Tang's service reads like an epic. 5 war patrols, 33 enemy ships destroyed, over 100,000 tons of enemy shipping sent to the bottom, 2 Presidential Unit citations, 1 Medal of Honor, multiple Navy crosses, and countless other decorations. But these statistics, impressive as they are, cannot capture the human reality. 87 men who volunteered for one of the war's most dangerous services, who trained together and fought together, and who ultimately shared a fate that mixed triumph with unimaginable tragedy. Their story, preserved in official records, survivor testimony, and historical analysis, ensures that USS Tang will never be just another statistic in the vast accounting of World War II. She remains what she was on that October night in 1944, a fighting ship and her crew, pushing the boundaries of courage and capability until the moment when their own weapon turned against them in the cruelest twist of fate imaginable.